Welcome to ZANE Radio, audio reports from ZANE's friends and partners on the ground in Zimbabwe. My name is John Haynes. In this edition, Margaret, a ZANE team member, tells us the story of Tony and his terrible medical situation, and the way that ZANE supporters have helped him through it. This is an edited version of a report that was first delivered at ZANE's online conference on the 16th of March 2021.
Thank you for joining this online conference today and for listening to our messages from Zimbabwe. My story is about one man, one of the 150 people I help in my area of the country. On my monthly visit to a retirement cottage complex in a small town, I found Tony limping. He said he thought he had stood on something because he had seen a bit of blood on the inside of his sandal. When I asked him how the pain was, he laughed and said he was lucky. Because of his diabetes, he couldn't feel much pain in his feet, unless it was extreme, but he thought that this time something was wrong. He pulled his trouser leg up a bit, and there was no visible wound, but I could see that his foot was swollen, and suggested he go to the doctor. Tony said he'd leave it for a couple more days and see how it was. This is a common statement in Zimbabwe. People put it off and put it off, hoping they won't have to spend money they don't have. 2 days later, I phoned Tony's friend Frances to find out how he was. She said he hadn't gone to the doctor yet. The swelling hadn't gone down. His foot was red and hot to the touch, and she was worried. The next day, the message came from Frances. I've asked a neighbour to take Tony to the doctor. His foot is getting worse. 2 hours later, another message came. They've admitted him to the clinic. His blood sugar is very high. His BP is all over the place. When I phoned the next day, Tony was still in the clinic and in a lot of pain. I thought of his words about not feeling pain, and I knew then that this must be serious. Frances told me a large abscess had formed on the sole of his foot. The next message came that afternoon. Tony's okay. They've lanced the abscess and cleaned it, but are keeping him overnight for observation and to stabilise his BP and blood sugar. 3 days later, Tony was still in the clinic. When the doctor had removed the dressing after the first lancing, they saw that more abscesses had formed, and they had to lance them too. There was obviously a lot of infection there. Every day, Frances and I talked about the money. The expenses were mounting up already. After 5 days in the clinic, Tony was ready to be discharged. Frances had made a bed up for him on her front veranda. She knew he'd never be able to cope on his own until everything had healed. The clinic had phoned and asked Frances to come when the dressing was being changed so that they could show her what to do, as it was going to have to be her taking over the daily cleaning and dressings when Tony was discharged. It sounded like a simple request, but for someone who can only walk with the help of a walker, hasn't got a car and hasn't got any money, it was a big issue. She sent me a photograph of Tony's foot, and I was shocked. 2 large wounds on the sole of his foot, one under his toes 2 inches long and 1 inch across, and a deep wound stretching across the arch of his foot. Every day the messages went back and forth. Frances was doing the dressings. She sounded stressed and exhausted. She was borrowing money from all over the place to buy the bandages, gauze, disinfectant and antiseptic. 4 days later, the next call came, and I could hear the fear in Frances's voice. I can smell it all over my house, Frances said. Something's really wrong. I'm so scared. When I took the bandage off, the wound smelt rotten. Get him straight to the clinic, I urged Frances. She was crying, and so was I, both of us fearing what lay ahead. I'd been visiting Tony and Frances every month for the last 10 years. They thought of me as their family, called me their guardian angel, and were always so grateful for the way ZANE helped them month after month, year after year. A few hours later, the next call came. Tony needed to see a specialist urgently. The nearest one was 200 kilometres away, and it would be 3 days before they could see him. Frances kept on with the daily dressings and sent me a photograph. A deep hole now tracked all the way along the underneath of Tony's foot. I feared the worst, and so did they. Tony may lose his foot. Every conversation now was about the money. How would they pay the transport to get to Harare? The specialist fees, the tests, the medication, the hospital, and what we all feared, the surgeon and the anaesthetist. Finally arriving in Harare, the first specialist they saw wanted US$ cash up front before he had even opened the bandage. After the payment was made, he took one look, wrote a referral for a specialist surgeon, took a video and made a phone call. "Come now," the specialist surgeon said. Frances phoned me. It was lunchtime. They were at the surgeon's rooms waiting to see him. "I've sent you a video," she said. "Don't watch it till after lunch." She laughed nervously, and I could hear the terror in her voice, and did what I could to reassure her. "Be strong. You can do this." "I don't know what we'd do without you," Frances said. I kept looking at the video clip sitting there on my phone, but I couldn't bring myself to watch it. Not yet. The messages kept coming. It was Friday afternoon. "The surgeon wants him in theatre tomorrow morning. He has to have a COVID test before they'll admit him. It's $60. They want x-rays of his chest because of the asthma, and of his foot, $40 each. They want a blood test, it's $30. And so it went on, and he hadn't even been admitted into the hospital bed yet. I juggled my funds and then forced myself to watch the video. After 16 years involved with the most tragic ZANE cases, I'd never seen anything like this. The flesh looked brown and putrid, and the wound was full of maggots. The image was horrifying, and it haunted me. Even though my brain told me maggots would be cleaning the wound, my heart was so heavy. Was it really possible Tony's foot could be saved? That night, the message from Frances was to say they'd removed 10 maggots, cleaned the wound again, and Tony had been talking about amputation. He had made peace with the fact that that was possible. He had been sedated now and was sleeping after a very traumatic day. "It's in God's hands," Tony had said to Frances before she left him for the night. Saturday morning, I went exploring with friends, looking for solace, searching for 2,000-year-old rock paintings halfway up a steep, slippery kopje deep in the bush. We could see the rocky overhang and the cave above us. I could see the ancient red paintings, and was almost on my hands and knees to get up the last steep bit when my phone started ringing in my pocket. I grabbed a Masasa sapling, pulled myself up, and with one arm wrapped around the tree to stop myself from falling, I answered the call I'd been dreading, I'd been waiting for. It was the specialist surgeon. Quiet, polite and compassionate, he told me they were preparing for theatre, and he wanted me to confirm that I would guarantee the fees. "I'll do my best to save his foot, if I can," he said, and I felt the tears dripping down my face while I hung onto a tree under the gaze of ancient rock paintings, and we talked about money, negotiating it to the lowest possible amount, and arranged where and when I would pay. That night, Frances and I both cried when she phoned me to say they had saved Tony's foot. Miraculously, 3 weeks later, Tony was back on the bed on Frances's veranda. The wound was massive, stretching from his toes to the arch of his foot. It couldn't be stitched and was just going to have to heal slowly by itself, but it was still there. Tony's foot was still there. Every day, Tony has to be taken to the local clinic for the wound to be bathed and dressed. Every day they charge him $8, depleting Tony's entire monthly church pension every 4 days. An horrific situation for all Zimbabweans since the government converted all our pensions and savings into Zimbabwe dollars in 2019. A month after the crisis began, I sat under a tree with Frances and Tony. Hands were sanitized, masks on, and we sat 2 meters apart. The bills were almost all paid. Borrowed money returned, and he was healing, mentally and physically. Tony pulled his trouser leg up to his knee and drew an invisible line round his leg, below the knee. "That's where I told them they could amputate too," he said, his eyes full of tears, "and mine too. Our masks hiding so much emotion. How can I ever thank you?" he said. "It's not me to thank, Tony. It's all our donors," I said. "Can I tell them your story?" Tony couldn't speak, his eyes full of tears, and he nodded and patted his hand on his chest, on his heart, and I did likewise. Thank you all for listening and for helping us to save lives, give hope, and restore dignity.
Thank you for listening to ZANE Radio. please donate to ZANE at www.zane.uk.com. Music was by Kevin MacLeod at www.incompetech.filmmusic.io.